everybody, and welcome to episode 16 of AJTV. I am AJ Soccer, and I really wanted to do a video from Worlds, but the problem was that all of the great matches from Worlds were in either dead formats or soon-to-be dead formats. Standard rotates in a couple weeks, and it didn't feel worthwhile to do a video on a standard match. Meanwhile, this tournament happened and saved me because the finals was a really great match with a lot of learnable, teachable moments in it. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Normally, I would suggest watching the match, but since we're going to go over the whole match anyway, there doesn't seem to be a lot of point. And this is a very weird deck and a weird matchup that has weird games, and the casters basically had no idea what was going on the entire time, so I actually don't recommend watching the match this time around. And one more thing before we get started is that I want to say what should go without saying, which is that Zac and Brian both had amazing weekends and put up fantastic performances and are solid players, and I definitely don't want to take anything away from them. I say this because I'm going to be extremely, highly critical of their play in this video, and that is for learning purposes only. It's very different for me to be able to dissect a match after the fact while watching it 10 times with slow motion and instant replay than it is to play it out under the lights with everything on the line at the end of 2 long days with incomplete information, etc. So just keep that in mind and don't think that this is sort of a projection or have your own projections, and just take it for what it is. So here it is, Zac Elsik's Lantern control deck. Pretty cool new addition with the Aether Grid. Pretty solid win conditions / extra control element. If you're not aware of how this deck works, it uses discard spells to get the relevant cards out of your hand, and then Lantern of Insight, which is a pretty unique card, and cards that interact with the top of players' libraries to manipulate both players' draws to ensure that it draws relevant cards and the opponent does not. It uses Ensnaring Bridge to sort of lock the opponent out, and then the card manipulation cards help protect the Ensnaring Bridge sort of incidentally. Zac played this deck to a top 16 finish in the last Modern GP and ended up winning this one, spoiler alert. So the deck is a real deal. I recorded a video with a now super outdated version a while back, and it was pretty fun to play, although pretty annoying to play against. Zac has definitely fine-tuned it and was well rewarded. In addition to making this awesome deck, he also has an awesome shirt with some penguins listening to music, which is pretty cool. Nisa's lapel here kind of looks like Neko ears on Zac, which I also like. On the other side, BBD's playing straight blue-red Splinter Twin. In case you've been living under a rock, uses Splinter Twin on either Deceiver Exarch or Pestermite for Infinity Fairies! Or Infinity, whatever Exarchs are. It's more of a control-y deck with some tempo elements that has a combo kill. Uses, traditional blue control elements supplemented by the extremely powerful Snapcaster Mage, and eventually either grinds you out or can kill you very easily on turn 4. BBD on the play kept 4 lands, Dispel, Vendilion, Cryptic. Not a great hand by any stretch, but I don't think you can mulligan it. 4 lands is a lot against a deck designed to make you draw only lands, and Dispel is pretty much a dead card, but Vendilion and Cryptic are 2 of the very few relevant cards that Brian has access to, so it's probably a keep. Zac has a turn 1 Lantern, which shows Brian Braun-Duin a Cavern of Souls, which he chooses to shuffle away with this Misty Rainforest, only to reveal another Misty Rainforest on top. In his draw step, we see some fireworks. Zac Elsik pulls the trigger on his Surgical Extraction, trying to take the Misty Rainforest from Brian's hand. I actually hate this play, but let's look at how the sequence plays out. BBD dispels the first Surgical, and Zac pulls the trigger on a second, hitting the Misty Rainforest he knew about, as well as an additional copy in BBD's hand. This looks like a really profitable exchange, but let's break it down. When I was watching live, I thought maybe there was a really powerful card on top of Brian's deck, that Zac was using this Surgical on Misty, getting one out of his hand as extra value, but really it was intended to be the shuffle effect. Not only is that not the case, Zac didn't even bother looking at the top of Brian's deck before casting his Surgical. What Zac is trying to accomplish with this exchange is to trade his Surgical Extraction for a land in Brian's hand and maybe some information. This is already flawed for 2 reasons. 1, the game is going to go long. You're unable to be able to keep Brian mana screwed long enough for it to be impactful. And second, BBD has already shown that he's not mana light by purposefully shuffling away a Cavern of Souls. Trading a spell for a land is usually not good anyway, but Surgical Extraction is actually a very good spell. One of the best cards that the Twin deck has access to against the Lantern deck is Snapcaster Mage, which Surgical Extraction can actually fight. Not to mention that if you mill one, you can tag Cryptic Commands or Splinter Twins, which greatly impacts the way that the matchup plays out. Meanwhile, on the other side, BBD has access to 3 Dispels in his main deck that are just terrible, and nothing really to do on turn 2. So all you're doing by playing Surgical into open blue mana is letting Brian use one of his unusable spells in a very timely and convenient way. The reason Zac probably thought that this was okay to do is because he has a second copy of Surgical Extraction. The problem with this is that once you cast the first one, you might as well put a ring on it because it's a very committal line. As the first one gets dispelled, you're pretty priced into casting the second one. Besides, it's not like your redundant Surgical is dead by any means. Having extra Surgicals lets you fight through those dispels later on when you're fighting over actually relevant things. If you look at the output of the exchange that Zac volunteered himself into, he used 2 Surgical Extractions, which can potentially be very, very good, and what he got in return was an otherwise useless Dispel and what he thought was going to be a land, and ended up being 2, but as you're gonna see, Braun-Duin had no mana issues whatsoever. As the Twin player, you would happily trade 2 extra lands and a useless Dispel for both copies of Zac's Surgical Extraction. Not only because they're very good in the matchup, but also because they can be extremely annoying to play against, and knowing that both are gone makes BBD's position a lot easier to play for the rest of the game. One more small thing to think about in all this craziness is the little known rule that when searching hidden zones for specific things, you can fail to find. In this case, Surgical Extraction is letting Zac search Braun-Duin's deck for cards named Misty Rainforest, and despite there being one in there, he is allowed to choose not to take it. The reason this might be relevant is Braun-Duin has 2 Sulfur Falls in hand, and it should be obvious that you aren't going to be able to mana screw him this game, so by taking that extra Misty Rainforest, all you're really doing is thinning a land out of his deck. Now, since it's a fetch land, it might be worth taking anyway, as shuffle effects can be pretty annoying to play against with the Lantern lock, but it's something to think about. BBD plays a second land, revealing an island on top, and passes to Zac, who draws the Mox, plays a land, a second Lantern, and the Mox, with a Pithing Needle on top of his deck. Brian draws the island, revealing yet another land on top, plays his third land, then passes back to Zac, who draws a Pithing Needle, revealing another Pithing Needle, while BBD stops him in his draw step to Vendilion Clicken. Zac's hand at the moment is the Pithing Needle, an Ensnaring Bridge, and an Academy Ruins. Operating under the correct assumption that Ensnaring Bridge is being taken by the Click, Zac takes the opportunity to shuffle his deck with a Lantern to avoid drawing the redundant Pithing Needle. It's obvious enough that a random card is going to be better than the redundant needle. The question is whether the random card is better than a redundant needle and the second copy of Lantern in play. My instinct is to say no, but I'm willing to believe that Zac is correct in doing so. With a land on top, he reveals his hand to Brian, who decides that he'd rather cross a bridge of ice than be ensnared by one, and makes the trade, only to reveal another ensnaring bridge underneath. Land go is all Zac has, and Brian untaps, draws his land, and reveals his Serum Visions on top, attacking for 3, playing his 4th land, and passing back. Ensnaring Bridge is drawn, revealing another land. With access to Academy Ruins, Zac doesn't care too much about his Ensnaring Bridge being jammed into Braun-Duin's known cryptic command. He's under enough pressure from the Vendilion Click that he has to stick the bridge eventually, so he might as well start grinding Brian down now. Brian obviously obliges with the Dismiss, drawing Serum Visions and revealing another land. Zac passes and Brian draws the land, revealing a Dispel, attacking for 3 and casting his Serum Visions, drawing the Dispel, revealing a Remand, scrying that to the top and a Cavern of Souls to the bottom. Plays his land and passes back to Zac. Zac draws his land and plays it, revealing a Spellskite on top. He then casts his Pithing Needle, naming Desolate Lighthouse blind. This may seem a bit odd, but there are a couple things going on here. First of all, according to Brian's article, Zac was under the impression that he was playing 2 copies of Desolate Lighthouse. But even if he knew there was only one, it's still probable that he would have named it. The only other thing that he can really name is Deceiver Exarch or Pestermite to turn off the Splinter Twin granted ability. While this seems okay, not only can you just be comboed by the other side, but Ensnaring Bridge coming down means that you can't be comboed at all. Meaning that if you were to name a non-Desolate Lighthouse card, it would actually be Snapcaster Mage. Bridge shuts down the other creatures from going infinite, and if Bridge isn't landing, you're dying to the Vendilion Click anyway. Not to mention the Spellskite on top, which can stop any Splinter Twin shenanigans, but can do nothing against the Loot House. The reason to cast it proactively is that he no longer has Metalcraft thanks to sacrificing his redundant Lantern. He's going to want access to that Mox mana next turn to get his bridge through the Remand that he now knows about. Brian draws the Remand, revealing an Exarch, attacks for 3 and passes. On end step, Zac Academy Ruins is back, the Ensnaring Bridge, untaps, draws it, and casts it. When I was watching it live, I had heart palpitations at this point because I thought that Zac tapped wrong, but he actually has perfect information, so he knows it doesn't matter. Brian plays his Deceiver Exarch end step, which I would not have done, but is not a huge deal. What is a huge deal is the Snapcaster on top of his deck. Zac is forced to sacrifice his lantern to shuffle it away. Giving Brian access to flashing back Cryptic Command is way too strong. The random card he draws is Remand and he passes. Zac draws his Spellskite and plays it, which Brian remands into another Remand. He remands again and Zac casts it again. BBD forgets for a moment that the Mox counts itself for Metalcraft, and the Spellskite resolves. The two unseen cards drawn are the third Dispel and a Stomping Ground. Academy Ruins gets back Lantern, which reveals a Snapcaster Mage that Zac chooses to shuffle away. The lock is nearly complete, and Brian's only way out of this involves Cryptic Command, which Snapcaster has access to. The random card Brian draws is the Cavern of Souls he shuffled away at the very beginning of the game. Zac draws the Lantern he knows is on top. Lightning Bolt is fine to give Brian. And when BBD reveals yet another Snapcaster, he has to shuffle it away, and Academy Ruins the Lantern back on top yet again. Lantern comes back down, and Brian reveals the Pithing Needle Desolate Lighthouse, which he draws and reveals yet another land, while Zac draws his Ghost Quarter and reveals whatever that card is called. Giriper Aether Grid? Something like that. But before he can draw it, BBD reveals yet another Snapcaster Mage, so we have to do the Lantern Dance again. Skip your draw step, shuffle target player's library doesn't seem like that powerful of an effect, but that's why it's called a soft lock. Splinter Twin obviously doesn't matter, so the Aether Grid gets to come down, and that's essentially the lock. For the sake of time, I'll tell you Ancient Stirrings finds Ghoul Caller's Bell, and Aether Grid wins the game in short order. After the tournament, I asked Zac how he sideboarded, said he brought in the two Grafdigger's Cages, these fight Snapcaster Mages, as well as Ancient Grudges, and he brought in one jar, cutting the Aether Grid. Presumably it's just real expensive and slow, not that impactful, susceptible to remand, etc., as well as a Mox Opal, which is somewhat interesting. I suppose it's just the games are going to go long, your cards are all going to need to be cards, you don't have to really accelerate anything out, but having the sustainable mana sources is actually pretty valuable. And the other card he cut, he wasn't sure if it was an Extraction or a Ghoul Caller's Bell. The Extraction you could probably cut because you're bringing in the cages, but I think I still like it, and shaving a bell is something that this deck can do in pretty much every matchup, so I would hope that he would cut the bell before the Extraction, but either way it makes sense. I also asked Brian how he sideboarded. He said that at first he went -4 Bolt, which obviously makes sense, as well as -3 Dispels and minus the Spell Snare. Those are all fairly intuitive. He then said that he initially cut a Remand, which I'll get to a little later, bringing in 2 Grudges because Artifacts, 2 Jaces because Grindhouse, 2 Keranos because Grindhouse and Uninsnarable Bridgeable Win Condition, +1 Lavamancer, Uninsnarable Win Condition, +1 Negate for non-creature spells, and +1 Roast for Spellskites. BBD on the play again as both players mulligan, keeps Misty Tarn Twin Cryptic Visions. We don't have to wait all the way until the second draw step of the game for the mistakes to start this time, as BBD leads with the wrong land. You know Zac is willing to blow his surgicals on fetches, so why give him the chance to do so for value by using a redundant fetch? The chances that the difference between those fetches ends up mattering is infinitesimal compared to the very real chance that we could see a sequence similar to what happened in Game 1, especially after a Serum Visions is cast. And this time you care a lot more about those cards / that mana. Which brings me to mistake number 2. BBD casts a turn 1 Serum Visions, which I'm pretty sure is wrong. Your hand is already a good balance of mana and spells, so you're not even sure what you're looking for yet. Even if you do find something you want and scry it to the top, the opponent's deck has up to 8 ways to mess with that. And while scry might not be good, cantrips definitely are. Having the ability to draw a card later on while under a soft lock can be extremely valuable. As could be expected, Brian scries a Snapcaster Mage to the top of his library, and Ghoul Caller's Bell comes down and mills it immediately. While running out the Serum Visions on one could be debated on both sides, I strongly believe that Brian's second land should have been the Cavern of Souls. Shuffle effects are actually fairly valuable resources in this matchup, as they can help combat the soft lock for a draw step. As long as Cryptic Command can be cast on 4, as many non-fetch lands should be played before fetches. Meanwhile, Ancient Stirrings finds a Black Cleave Cliffs, which comes into play and casts an Inquisition of Kozilek. A card that I absolutely hate, and this is pretty illustrative of exactly why. Zac has his discard spells split 2 Thoughtseize, 4 Inquisition, and I'd rather see that be 3/3 if not 2/4 the other way. Obviously the life is not free, but there are way too many cards in the format that cost 4 or more that are essential to be able to hit. Cryptic Command and Splinter Twin are two obvious examples, but you could even go on to name cards like Scapeshift or Karn. Collected Company is all over the format, and Primeval Titan is another backbone card that's essential to be able to hit. And this is to say nothing of sideboard cards such as Fracture and Gust, Creeping Corrosion, and Shatterstorm, which are already players in the format that are only going to go up in popularity thanks to Zac's win. After Brian cracked this fetch for no reason, he then plays his third land as another fetch that he plans to crack for no reason. Again, this would just be the Cavern. He then passes and doesn't cast Pestermite on Zac's upkeep. I disagree with this as well. Zac using Ancient Stirrings for Blackcleave Cliffs as his second land drop indicates to me that he is Mana Light. If he is indeed going to miss this next land drop, then the difference between 1 mana and 2 mana is massive. It's the difference between being able to do one thing this turn and two things this turn. If he does have or hit a third land, then it's not only the difference between being able to do 3 things in the turn and being able to do 2 things in the turn, but it means being able to slow him down from casting Ensnaring Bridge for a turn, which is conveniently the turn you need to have Cryptic Command ready in time. Not to mention that from here on in, you're presumably going to be holding up Cryptic Command, which means this is your last opportunity to Pestermite for tempo. Zac plays a Thoughtseize, which prompts Brian to cast his Pestermite anyway, cracking a fetch. This is all sorts of cringe for me. Zac has a Pithing Needle in hand, and the commentators speculate on casting it, naming the Pestermite, opening the Thoughtseize up to taking a Cryptic. The problem with this, of course, is that Brian can just Cryptic the Pithing Needle, end step, untap, Splinter Twin, game over. So he takes the Twin and follows it up with Grafdigger's Cage, shutting off any future Snapcaster Mages as well as the flashback of any Ancient Grudges that get milled. BBD's fourth land comes in the form of an island, which means that we could easily have a Cavern in play and a fetch land in hand rather than the inverse. He attacks for 2 and passes back to Zac, who finds a third land and plays a Pithing Needle. You could make an argument here for counter draw, but I like Brian letting the Pithing Needle resolve. The Needle then names Pestermite, which I don't agree with. The idea here is obviously insurance against the top deck Splinter Twin ending the game. The problem with this is that if BBD did find a Twin, he could easily just Cryptic the Needle end step and go off anyway. I think I'd prefer to hold the Needle and see what happens, as it's fairly likely you're going to have to name Desolate Lighthouse this game. If Brian finds the copy of the combo in the short term, you're dead either way, but if he doesn't, then you'd much rather have Lighthouse named, as you have way more answers to the combo than you do to Lighthouse, especially after you mill a copy of Ghost Quarter. At this point, BBD has a Clock Down and a couple Cryptics in hand. I don't think there's a need to cast his Serum Visions. The Scry isn't anything with a Bell in play, and the card you draw is random just like your next draw step will be. It's tempting to say that you could hit a Twin and just win next turn, but you're so far ahead that hedging against ways where you could possibly fall behind seems more worthwhile to me. Inquisition that can only hit a remand gets remanded, and Zac plays a Pyrite Spellbomb to deal with the Pestermite. Serum Vision sees Splinter Twin and Desolate Lighthouse, and BBD concocts a plan. Put both on top, and Zac can only mill them one at a time with the Bell. Use Cryptic Command with Draw as one of the modes to get the second card out from underneath the Bell. BBD actually lets Zac untap with the Bell, which is a pretty massive mistake. If he's going to use Cryptic to draw the Loot House, he should do it while the Bell is tapped. There are 2 reasons for this, the first of which is that Zac could simply pass the turn and activate the Bell on upkeep. BBD would then have to tap 4 mana on his own turn, which he'd obviously like to avoid doing. Another issue is what if Zac draws a Codex Shredder or another Ghoulcaller spell? If one of these cards is Zac's next play, there's never an opportunity for Brian to draw the Lighthouse while not under threat of having it be milled. Thankfully for Brian, Zac just untaps and immediately activates the Bell. In response, BBD casts the Cryptic to draw the Lighthouse, the other mode being Bounce Grafdigger's Cage, which simply serves to choke a mana from Zac. And now we see the reason why Zac activated his Bell at sorcery speed. If Brian Braun-Duin wanted to use a cantrip to draw his scryed card, then Zac could simply Inquisition it. The problem is this only really works if the card is exactly Ancient Grudge. As it turns out, it's the Lighthouse that the Pithing Needle is not naming, a mountain, and a Cryptic Command that you still can't take. Nice Inquisition. Zac doesn't come out of the exchange completely empty-handed, as he gets to resolve a Lantern of Insight while BBD is tapped out. With Grafdigger's Cage in play, Zac lets Brian draw his Snapcaster Mage, revealing a Sulphur Falls. He plays his Desolate Lighthouse that he worked so hard to acquire and passes back to Zac. Despite obviously not wanting the Glimmer Void, he can't activate his Bell because he has to fight the Lighthouse now. Brian lighthouses away the land on top. The name of the game for him now is to find 2 relevant cards in a row to get through the Mill Lantern Softlock. He accomplishes this goal immediately, hitting an Ancient Grudge which forces Zac to Bell, only to reveal a twisted image beneath it. Cage stops it anyway for now, but with Ancient Grudge in the yard, let's take a moment to look at Brian's lands over the course of the game. Especially after seeing a Ghoulcaller's Bell, finding a green source should be BBD's third priority after finding triple blue and double red. Getting your green source ghost quartered would kinda stink, but getting it milled would really stink. I've already talked about leaving fetches in play to fight the soft lock, but the fact that BBD has cracked 3 fetches and doesn't have green is pretty inexcusable. BBD end steps his Snapcaster Mage in Ambush Viper mode to start attacking, as well as give him a target for the twisted image he's going to draw. If BBD had green mana like he should, then I actually like holding Snapcaster here, because you can set up a pretty powerful sequence by bouncing a Grafdigger's Cage on end step, then you have access to Snapcaster Cryptic as well as the Ancient Grudge. Finding another copy of Ensnaring Bridge on top of his deck, Zac decides it's time to run his first copy into the Cryptic command. This is probably necessary but fairly scary, as Ghoulcaller's Bell can no longer manipulate the top of BBD's deck without also milling away your Ensnaring Bridge. With the card off of the Cryptic, a Lighthouse activation, a draw step, and another potential Lighthouse activation, in addition to the Twisted Image and whatever else he draws, Zac has to fade a huge percentage of Brian's deck here. Again, the name of the game is to find multiple cards in a row that matter for BBD, so he uses his Lighthouse to mill away the land, and ends up deciding not to fight over the bridge with his Cryptic at all. Serum Visions ends up being the card going to his hand, and that Serum Visions draws an Electrolyze, which is definitely an upgrade for Brian. Serum Visions finds a Keranos, and with all 3 cards in his hand having the text to draw a card and a Lighthouse in play, it seems pretty difficult for Zac to be able to fight over the top of his deck here. Zac goes to his turn, draws his bridge, and inexplicably casts it. This is essentially Zac resigning himself to having Brian draw the Keranos, a card that he has no answer to and no way to race. By playing a second copy of Bridge that does nothing and then casting Stirrings, Zac has essentially clicked the you lose the game button. Instead of casting that Bridge, let's say he leads with Ancient Stirrings and finds, I don't know, for the sake of argument, I'll name a random card off the top of my head, Ghoulcaller's Bell. Brian may have 3.5 cantrips available to him, but he can only access 2 of them right now. The fight could go mill, draw, crack Lantern. Instead he just dies to the Keranos. A couple of interesting things happen in the rest of this game, but it pretty much is over as soon as Keranos hits, so let's skip to Game 3. For Game 3, Brian cut 2 more remands for 2 Blood Moons. Blood Moon is actually pretty good in this matchup, as Academy Ruins is one of the most powerful tools that the Lantern deck has at its disposal. That being said, I'm not a fan of cutting remand, and talking with Brian after, he actually said the same thing, saying that if he went back in time, he would probably shave some pieces of the combo and leave in all the remands. It's a little frustrating that the coverage didn't bother going over how the players sideboarded, but thankfully both these players were easy to get in touch with and generous enough to share this information with me. The reason Brian and I like remand in this matchup, despite the Lantern deck having pretty much only 1 mana spells, is that drawing a card at instant speed is one of the most valuable things that you can do in the matchup. Even if it means investing a ton of mana by casting a Pestermite or Exarch and remanding your own spell. On the play for the first time in the match, Zac mulligans to 6 and has a turn 1 Grafdigger's Cage off of Ghost Quarter. Brian's opener on the draw is Tarn, Vents, Island, Visions, Electrolyze, Twin, and Roast. His first draw is a Sulphur Falls, and he wants to play turn 1 Visions. I think this one is a lot more defensible because we haven't seen a mill card from Zac yet, and Brian's hand could definitely use a little more gas. What's less defensible is his choice of first land. Once again, out of sheer muscle memory, he leads with a fetch land. Serum Visions hits another Serum Visions and scries into Desolate Lighthouse and Snapcaster Mage. With Grafdigger's Cage already in play, the Snapcaster goes to the bottom and the Lighthouse obviously on top. Ancient Stirrings finds a copy of Lantern Insight, which comes down and shows the Lighthouse, as well as an Inquisition of Kozilek for Zac. Brian draws the Lighthouse, revealing a remand on top, which he Serum Visions into, as well as a Keranos and a land that he puts on the bottom. If only that Inquisition were a Thoughtseize, he could wait another turn, let Brian draw the Keranos and Thoughtseize that. Instead he has to Inquisition this hand, and chooses to take Remand, as he's quite mana light. He misses his 3rd land drop, though it's only going to be for a turn. He follows up with a Pyrite Spellbomb before passing back. Brian untaps and draws the Keranos, revealing an island underneath it. He then inexplicably plays Lighthouse as his 3rd land before he can activate it into a Ghost Quarter. This makes absolutely no sense to me. Zac takes the turn back, draws his Tendo Ice Bridge and plays it along with an Ensnaring Bridge. BBD spews off his Electrolyze on end step for also pretty much no reason. Theoretically, he's digging to exactly Cryptic Command to protect Keranos from Thoughtseize, but facing down a Lantern, having the instant speed cantrip is extremely valuable. But even if you were to hit one, it would only cost Zac his Lantern and he would still be able to Thoughtseize the Keranos. Brian draws a bunch of lands and ends with a Pestermite on top. Zac draws and casts Thoughtseize, planning to take the Keranos, and does so. BBD loots on end step, drawing the Pestermite, discarding an island, but most importantly reveals a Vendilion Click on top. Zac takes the opportunity to Ghost Quarter the Lighthouse. Not only does he not want Brian to get another activation out of it, but if Brian wants to get the land, he has to shuffle away the Vendilion Click. Brian correctly chooses not to search, identifying that Vendilion Click in hand is far more important than the 4th land in play. The reason this is so important is because the Ghoul Caller's bell on top of Zac's library represents the soft lock completing. Unfortunately for Brian, when Zac goes to his draw step and draws the bell, he reveals another one on top, and Brian's stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's no longer capable of keeping Zac from having access to bell, but he also won't be able to use the Vendilion on himself as a cantrip to get into an important card when he's swamped by all these bells. Zac trades bell for bell, revealing the Spellskite, which Inquisition can protect from Roast. The game continues for about 20 more turns, but it's a completely Sisyphean effort from Brian. It's a hopeless position, and he's just locked out of the game. So there you have it, your GP Oklahoma City champion, Zac Elsik with Lantern Control. May not seem like it's going to be a big player, but I definitely think it's a viable deck. It's easy to say that it could be hated out by cards that blow up artifacts and whatnot, but by its very nature, the deck is resilient to those types of things, what with the whole idea being keeping you from drawing your relevant spells. It doesn't fare too well against aggressive decks, that is, ones that aren't heavily creature-based, but Sundroplet's pretty awesome, and he was able to beat Jasper in the top 8 despite being on the draw against the burn deck. So I could definitely see this deck picking up some traction come Modern season. That is, if anybody's willing to learn how to play it, and of course has a blatant disregard for the emotional experience of their opponents. Thank you all so much for checking out this episode of AJTV. I put a ton of love into this episode, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please consider checking out the Patreon to support the show. You can also donate directly. Both those links are in the description below. As much as I love making these videos, they are a lot of work and very time-consuming. So the only way that I'm able to do these is through the very generous contributions from viewers like you. This episode was brought to you by the Bluest of Spiders, Sergey S., Jim, Liquid Snake, Nelson K, Andy Talaga, Candlehawk, Arkanoy, J King, Surfcat, Darren S, and everybody else over on the Patreon. If you follow that link, there's a very short 1-minute video that explains everything, so please check it out. You can also support the show non-financially by liking it and sharing it and favoriting it and tweeting it and Facebooking it and Redditing it and G+ing it. What else is there? Snapchat? Can you Snapchat this? Maybe not. Vine? I don't think so. Just spread the word however you can so that we can grow the community surrounding the show. So thank you all once again. You can also check out my modern video series right here. I stream twice a week, Monday and Thursday, at twitch.tv/AJSoccer, and have 2 more new pieces of content coming up soon. One is a poker podcast that I'm doing with Ruben Bressler and our friend Ryan LaPlante, which you can follow at The Muck Podcast on Twitter. And the other is a video series that I've been wanting to do for a while that's a bit hard to explain, so you'll just have to subscribe to the YouTube channel and see what it is when it comes out. It's sort of a vloggy platform, and the first episode that I'm working on right now is going to be about the design decisions in Battle for Zendikar. So I know I'm kind of heaping a lot on you right here, but all of the links will be in the description below, and if you just want one source for all of this, the best way to do that is to follow me on Twitter. It's just at AJSoccer, and I tweet whenever I do a thing. And boy, do I like doing things.